Hello and good afternoon. My name is Holly Tucker, and I'm director of the Robert Penn Warren Center for the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Harry C. Howard Jr. Lecture, Reimagining Cities, a conversation with Majora Carter. Harry Howard earned his bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt University in 1951. And in 1994, the Harry C. Howard Jr. Lecture was established through the endowment of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas E. Nash Jr. and Mr. and Mrs. George Renfro to honor their friend and attorney by establishing a lecture series in his name at his alma mater. The lecture has become a signature event each year for our center and has featured prominent scholars and artists such as David Blight, James McBride, Danielle Allen, Kiara Hudiz, and most recently, Jakira Diaz. Mr. Howard is among the attendees today, and we are very grateful to him and to his friends for their generosity, which has allowed us to host this year's honored speaker, Majora Carter. Majora is a real estate developer, urban revitalization strategy consultant, MacArthur Fellow, and Peabody-winning award broadcaster. She's responsible for the creation and successful implementation of numerous economic developments, technology and green infrastructures, policies and job training and placement systems. Majora was born, raised, and continues to live in the South Bronx. She received her undergraduate degree from Wesleyan University and her MFA from New York University. Her ability to shepherd projects through seemingly conflicted socioeconomic currents has garnered her 8 honorary PhDs and other awards such as the 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs by Goldman Sachs, Silicon Alley 100 by Business Insider, Liberty Medal for Lifetime Achievement by News Corp, and other honors from the National Building Museum, the International Interior Design Association, the Center for American Progress, as well as for TED Talk, one of the first 6 that launched that site in 2006. And most recently, she was awarded the 2020 Edmund and Bacon Urban Design Award. Additionally, Majora has served on the boards of the U.S. Green Building Council, Ceres, the Wilderness Society, and the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Welcome, we're so glad you're here. We are also fortunate to have her joined in conversation today by Dominique Anderson and Paul C. Taylor. Dominique Anderson is an affordable housing and social impact strategy consultant at Dominique Anderson Consulting in Nashville. She specializes in evaluating, creating, and improving a project's social impact on communities of color, as well as affordable housing development processes. Her passion for affordable housing and better communities has led her to become the executive director of the Tennessee Affordable Housing Coalition. Paul C. Taylor is W. Elton Jones Professor of Philosophy, Chair of Philosophy, and Professor of African American and Diaspora Studies at Vanderbilt University. He received his undergraduate training at Morehouse College and his graduate training at the Kennedy School of Government and at Rutgers University. His research focuses primarily on social and political philosophy, critical race theory, American philosophy, and Africana philosophy. His books include On Obama and Black is Beautiful, A Philosophy of Black Aesthetics, which received the 2017 Monograph Prize from the American Society for Aesthetics. He has recently launched the Racial Justice Humanities Lab, which houses several philosophically informed service learning projects related to social justice. Today's talk will be moderated by Leah Lowe. Leah Lowe is Associate Professor of Theater at Vanderbilt and holds a secondary appointment in the American Studies program. She directs plays at our university and in the larger Nashville community, including the highly successful production of How to End Poverty in 90 Minutes. That's even more wishful thinking. With Michael Rode from the Sojourn Theater and Center for Performance as Civic Practice. Her latest project is Sloppy Bonnie, an original country western musical by VU writer in residence Kristen Knight and composer Barry Brinegar. The COVID-conscious outdoor production will premiere in the parking lot of Oz Arts Nashville in late May. Before we begin, let me extend a heartfelt thank you to Elizabeth Meadows, Terry Tripp, and Mary Gray Lindstrom for all of their hard work in making today's event happen. And I should also mention that there'll be time for a Q&A after the program. So if you have any question, please do submit it in the chat. With this, thank you, Majora, Dominique, Paul, and Leah for joining us today. And I'll turn the program over to our moderator, Leah Lowe.
Thank you, Holly, for those wonderful introductions. Majora Carter, it's wonderful to have you here. I'd love to begin by asking you to just give participants an overview of your work. We're most interested in sort of thinking about crucial principles. How do you balance principles and values in imagining a more just city?
Well, it kind of helps growing up in one in which principles for its justness were not really considered that well or often or early. So I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City, and we were and specifically in the 1970s and 80s, and it was definitely a poster child for urban blight. Financial disinvestment really created the kind of environmental burdens, certainly the socioeconomic conditions that most of us lived under. We really also saw, the extraction, of the fact that many folks actually, like from the Great Migration, my family included, came up from down south, actually bought property, which then became worthless. And then over the course of many years, that property sort of became worthless for a while. And then it's sort of like actually dealing with the impact of reurbanization and thus gentrification and displacement. So we're dealing with that kind of crazy little cycle that often happens in what we consider what we call American low status communities. And by low status, those are the communities that that have poor environmental lots of environmental burdens, poor health outcomes, high rates of unemployment and poverty, and also, but mostly people looking both inside the community and those from inside the community tend to understand that there is just a layer of inequality applied to them. So if we grow up in a place like that, and you're led to believe that in order to be anything, to do anything for yourself, you have to measure success by how far you get away from them. And I was one of those kids too. Brain drain is actively perpetuated in American low status communities. It's just a given. You're a smart kid. You need to grow up and get out. We measure success by how far we get away from it. We literally create the dynamic that creates the lack of social cohesion within our communities. We don't create economic diversity. We don't expect people of promise to stay in our communities, and nor do we give them the reasons to do so. So I moved from actually doing work around the environmental improvement of our community, which I still really believe in, but moved into like straight on real estate development because I realized that that's where the power was. Into how do we literally create the kind of communities that people feel they don't have to move out of in order to live in a better one that they feel that they have the right and the reasons to reinvest socially, emotionally, and also economically, so that they're not selling their family's house because they believe there's no value there, and that they're really working and lending their own model for success for future generations and even those just around them to see, and really using the assets that are all human beings within their own communities to support its own development. So I think that's what I do. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I do. So
yeah, that was great. When you think about serving your community, I'm wondering about how do you do the tricky balance between ideals and practical policies? Mm-hmm. What are some of the ways that you approach that kind of thicket?
I mean, it comes from a place of love for my own communities and communities like it, whether they are, Native American reservations, or whether honestly they're poor white, former coal mining towns, that have totally just lost whatever ever they had in there, but we suffer from the same issues of being low status and literally being at the receiving end of all of all the worst kind of social practices that happen, right? And so, but it also comes from looking really practically at what are the tools that, frankly, rich white men use in order to support the development of things that they actually care about. Like, how have they built wealth? How have they used the tools that are out there in particular? And we use real estate development because we know without a shadow of a doubt, like 2020 finally made some folks realize, oh wait, there's a wealth gap. Oh, a lot of it has to do with things like people not having access to capital and property and business development. Okay, so that access to capital, really recognizing that there were just and still are discriminatory policies that actually literally separated people from their ability to actually provide for their families, to generate wealth and pass it down to generations. I like those tools. I like them a lot. I think we should have access to them. I think we should use them. And I think that the folks that have literally kept access away from people like us doing these things, that there needs to be a come to Jesus moment about it, and then let's figure it all out. And fortunately, I do think that do feel very hopeful that that's starting to happen, um, in ways that honestly in 2019 I didn't think was even going to happen.
Great. I'd like to turn it over to Paul, who I know is interested in this connection between the ideal and the practical.
Thank you, Professor Lowe. I appreciate your sage guidance in managing this conversation. It is a real honor and a pleasure to be in such profound and thoughtful company. I'm honored. I'm particularly thrilled to be a part of this conversation, Majora, because I have the privilege now of exploring some possibilities with Ms. Anderson for some projects here in the Nashville area. And one of the things we want to do is, or one of the sort of underlying commitments for the work we're exploring, is that we want to make it possible for Vanderbilt to be a good neighbor, right? To be a responsible participant in the life of the Nashville community. And one of the things that means, and I'm working with my students on a version of this project, and one of the things we told them is, one of the things that means is not engaging in a non-imperialistic way, right? The burden is not to come with Vanderbilt's flag and plant it in the soil and say, we are here to fix things. The burden is to work with our partners in the community to find a way forward that works for all of us. But that's hard, right? And so that's the root of the question I want to ask you. It grows out of the question that Leah asked you. I'm thinking more, though, less in terms of sort of ideals and practice than in terms of aligning different visions for the future, right? So I'm curious to hear you say a little bit about how you approach that challenge, right? Of identifying potential partners, smoothing out the wrinkles between your different visions for the future, managing conflicts that might arise, right? I know you've had some challenges with these things in the past. Anyone who works in this space will have these challenges. And I'd love to hear you say a little bit about how you navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first off is it really does come down to love, right? And really feeling good about where you're coming from. Like, I want, whether it's my own community or it's communities that I'm dealing with, like, I really want to be able to say at the end of the day, the end of the year, that I've really thought about the kind of projects that we're doing and do not feel ashamed at all about why we've made those decisions. A lot of those decisions also come from the fact that we bothered to talk to people. When in my own practice, in my own neighborhood, and I also, when we work with other communities, this is the kind of thing that we're expecting them to do on some way, shape, or form, so that they're clear on what the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations, as well as what the needs are within a community. And from there, once you know that, so and our practice just involved, like, we did hundreds of surveys. It's like we had been studied as a community, like, from like a very top level, but we've never really asked folks, from what I saw, like, straight up, well, what do you like? What do you dislike? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations? And it was, looking back on the methodology, it probably wasn't the best survey in the world, but people sat down and answered 60 questions about like, why do they leave the neighborhood for fun? What do they do? What would you like to see here? And from that, we were able to craft, just the kind of visions that people told us what they wanted, right? And through that, and it was really interesting because as developers, like, and frankly, I'm a Black female developer with like a long on vision, short on balance sheet. But so I partner with folks all the time, right? Until I'm at a point where it's just like, nah, I could lead a project, which I expect to get to at some point in my life. But what we would do, we would often just like either rent small storefronts, because we built up over years really good relationships with folks that actually were property owners. And based on what our community, said that they were interested in looking at, we would try to, we would take advantage of these cheap rents. And then we would try to entice folks to come in to build the kind of things that we knew people were leaving the community to experience, right? And so things like cafes and restaurants and stuff like that. And honestly, we could not get anybody to come in to the South Bronx, at least my part of the South Bronx, to open up a coffee shop or a cafe, nothing like that. So that's when we had to do it ourselves. We did develop a joint venture. We got a coffee partner who was amazing. But then we realized that our competition was Dunkin' Donuts, not this like super fancy coffee that people liked, but Dunkin' Donuts was eating our lunch, literally. So we had to like ramp it up in a different way and literally and rebrand it to the Boogie Down Grind Cafe. And we're the birthplace of hip hop, and so we basically started doing things like open mics. We branded the names of our cappuccinos and our grandmaster frappes and things like that. And it really just was it was about our community, and that was really kind of awesome. But what was fascinating about the whole thing is that we built these spaces as ways so that people from our own community would really like embody what we think is an ethos of our work, which is that community is not just a place, it's an activity. But you have to build the places so that people feel like they can build community. Otherwise, they don't stick around. They just don't. So the talent retention strategy was literally building local businesses that made people feel as though their community was worth staying in. And from there, you could have the conversations about things like, are your parents selling their property? And ask them why. And things like, well, nobody wants to live here. This is the hood. And then realizing, but you're selling your house to a predatory speculator as opposed to looking for a family in the community that might want to stay here because they might be closer to their parents. And they've actually done the right thing and gone to school and want to, and have gone to college and they can afford to buy this house, but they can't buy it at the rate of a predatory speculator. They just can't. And actually, I want to use an example, of what I think, going back to Paul, one of your earlier question, like, how do you sort of balance this thing in terms of like, being a big institution, like an educational institution, in a community. And so you don't like come in with your like ideas of what you should do. One of my favorite examples is actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. Johnson C. Smith University and HBCU partnered with some local community groups down there, and it was a really poor part of Charlotte. And so they partnered with also financial institutions who were the ones who supported the development that was led by the local community, and the university was supporting them.
Mm.
And it's been, I think, an overwhelming success along the way. But it was basically the financial institution made it possible for those visions to become a reality, but they absolutely came from internally from the community.
Mm.
And it was a really powerful, I think a really great example of like how to make it happen, because it's like it's practical and it's real. And it's not like, I think one of the frustrations that I have, with the social justice movement in general, is that it's a lot of it's based on, the idealization, of like, we've got to dismantle capitalism. And I'm like, go for it. if way smarter people than me have tried and they're still trying, but in the meantime, let's figure out what we can do in the meantime to make people's lives a lot more comfortable than they are right now. We know the concentration of poverty is a terrible thing. Just statistically, it doesn't get better for anybody. That's why people want to leave. So how about we use the tools that we know are available and start demanding those so that we can start developing from the inside out. And that's why the Charlotte example was just like, blew me away, just utterly blew me away. And there's plenty of other examples out there, like that out there. Not enough as far as I'm concerned, but there's no reason why Vanderbilt couldn't be one of them.
Agreed. Hear, hear.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very powerful example. It's tremendously encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Leah, I could say more, but I want to be a good citizen, so I'm happy to cede the floor.
Well, I see Ms. Anderson nodding in her box, so I want very much to bring her into this conversation.
I want to know why you were laughing so much.
Because we are literally spirit animals, and I just want to be on record as when it's on video now, it's recording. So when I reach out to her, everyone, I want to be able to report back that she's my new mentor, because I love everything that you just said. And the thing about capitalism makes me laugh because in addition to the millions of things that I currently do, one of my clients is the Center for Transforming Communities in Memphis, and I'm working with them as a just growth champion, and launching the Community Land Trust and some other things. But the whole point of that is that I told my husband, who's a native Memphian, and I'm a native Nashvilleian by way of Puerto Rico, but I grew up here. My mother's a native Nashvilleian. So looking at that conversation and just thinking about the vast difference from the conversations I have in Memphis to what I have in Nashville, and especially even within communities of color and people wanting to do the good work, is always about capitalism. And so I'm what I like to call a money-making hippie. And I think that you get that, right? So one of the things that, and one of the conversations I have all the time is, well, how do we get rid of capitalism? You shouldn't, right? Like you should, but you can't. So here's in a space.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question really is, how do money-making hippies like you and myself, how do we, do the good work and make money, right? Like how do you do well by doing good? And how do you internally juggle that, not feeling bad about making money, not feeling bad about, like Jay-Z said, you can't help the poor if you're one of them, right?
Preach
So
it.
how do you juggle that?
I don't feel bad at all. And, and honestly, I wish that I was as wealthy as people like to think I am when I talk about money as much as I do. Because I'm just like, don't, seriously, like I am learning as I go, and I realize I made so many mistakes by not understanding the way money actually flowed, by not understanding some of the same principles that the rich white guys, like they tell their kids. They didn't tell us. So I don't have any children I could pass anything down to. I got a gajillion nieces and nephews though, so they're all expecting something at some point. But and you know what, they can have it. But what I really do feel is like we've got to raise the bar for an understanding of capital flows, and in particular how it moves through real estate. And especially now, I mean, when it's so ripe, where I think folks get like why we've lost so much. It's like people understand Tulsa and Greenwood, and Killer Mike's talking about it. And there's just this, I think there's the hope and the possibility now. And what we've got to get out of our way is this idea that we need to feel bad about making money. I mean, who does that serve?
1000% agree. Yeah.
Who does that serve? And and having like issues with the idea that somehow if you do that, you're not really a part, of the club. And it's just like, when we got a little $10,000 grant from Beyonce when she was doing the Bay Good thing for Black-owned small businesses, I looked around, at the range and the depth of which she literally supported many of us to stay afloat. And I thought, that's amazing. There she did. She just paid it forward, just like that. No skin off her back, I'm sure. Thank God, because it's a beautiful back and she's just amazing. But so most of us are never going to get to that level, right? But we can be thinking about how do we take what we have within our own community, hold on to it, and use it as a support system for all of us. One of them is just really recognizing that money isn't bad, how we use it is, but how are we literally using the opportunities that are there to be like, okay. And I love the idea of community land trusts on a certain level, but I've been utterly underwhelmed by the way I hear most people talk about them. And it's not because they're not actually being used, I think, to full effect, in terms of actually how do you help people literally create the type of foundation so that they're building equity. Most of them are talking about, oh, we need to build a nice community center that's still based on philanthropic support, as opposed to how do we use the opportunity so that we can create businesses around it or homeownership opportunities.
Right.
And those conversations, I've certainly haven't heard them, in most places I go, we don't hear them. Whereas there's like amazing, programs like, it's called EB-PREC, that's East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collective. They are actually buying a property, building businesses, building home ownership opportunities, and creating some levels of permanent affordability, for certain folks that really need it, and then others sort of buy into the vision. So it's a collective, but it's a really but they're using straight up bank financing. They are getting some really interesting stuff from like the kind of funds that are supportive of people of color and women-owned stuff, and amen, God bless them, that's amazing. But their core is really about local economic development and generational wealth creation.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just, we're always just waiting for somebody to come and be nice to us. And, that hasn't worked out that well.
Absolutely. I won't hijack this, Leah, because I literally could have a 12-hour conversation about this.
And I'm sure we will at some point.
We will.
I know. I'm looking forward to it.
Community land trust and community investment trust, I think, is the conversation. Just another question is, what does economic investment look like that serves the community? You just talked a little bit about it, but like, if it serves the community, what does that look like? And then how do we encourage that in putting together good community land trust and community investment trust and all of that?
Yeah. And you know what? And it's just, there's so many tools right now. One of my new favorites is, is the fact that now unaccredited investors can invest in real estate development projects and other kind of business development projects. Thanks to the new Security and Exchange Commission rules, like you no longer have to have, I don't even know what the number was, but it was something like $1 million in assets and make over $200,000 a year. But, if you're going to invest in some of these projects, but now you can do them literally, for some places where the floor is like you can invest $100 and you get either a revenue share, in some cases equity, but you get the same rate of return that someone who's investing $5 million, because now they can do those side by side kind of investments. And I think those are really powerful tools, that allow folks to literally see their money work. Or not, because yes, you could lose everything, but it's $100. So it's like, we spend more than that on sneakers sometime. I think what's his name? Married to the Kim woman, Kim Kardashian. What his
Kanye
sneakers
West?
just sold? Yeah, Kanye. His
Yeezys.
worn sneakers just sold for God knows how much money. So okay, not everybody's going to do that, but I know they sell for a lot. I get mine from Costco, so I don't really know what people do. But anywho, but I do think that those tools, like literally people being able to see that their money can spend the same way anybody else's does, is a powerful thing. Like because we've got another property over here. It's an old rail station that we acquired, that we're going to transform into it's about 4,500 square feet, and it's about 3,500 feet of it's going to be, just an event hall that we will rent out for all sorts of events, music, etc. And the 1,000 square foot is a separate commercial space that we're going to transform as soon as we possibly can into a recreational weed lounge. Now that it's legal in the states, in New York State, and it's really awesome because our legislation made a very significant point of making sure that the communities that were most affected by that quote unquote war on drugs are the ones that should absolutely be the ones who profit most from this legislation. And so you bet your bibby that, our commercial weed lounge over here, as much as we possibly can, and I honestly don't know how to do this, but we'll figure it out. We want to make sure that people in our own daggone community own a piece of that. Straight up, like my little old lady who lives across the street who will turn 98, that's, she needs to have a little piece of that. She's not going to go in there. I don't care. But the point is, like, she's got grandkids, let them have some. And well, when they're old enough or whatever, but you know what I mean? But it's super exciting. And I feel like now is the time for us to sort of like step away from this, like, you're not a legit, person unless you're like not, unless you want to dismantle capitalism, or, you're not really, woke if you actually talk about money in a way that's not just like, let's only take care of super poor people because that's basically what is the only thing that we're ever going to be. No, like we need to create economic, the kind of like vision for our own communities that, is diverse, and that shows that, even I think about some of the unintended consequences of integration. We were racially segregated, but our communities were economically diverse, and I think it was easier in those cases to like for people to see the possibility of a future that was inclusive of them, that wasn't just about being tortured and poverty stricken, and then having that as your sole expectation. But our communities are so segregated economically, not just racially, but economically. And I think that has an impact on how we see ourselves in the future. And sometimes I think some of the heat that even, the colleague, in Charlotte, when they did that project, even though the development was being done by the local community, and this was even before we started, so it was like I should have taken their example like even more seriously than I did. There were people in the community who were just like saw any development and could not possibly imagine that there were other people from that community doing that development and started throwing the gentrification word at them. And it was just like, wait, you see, no, like this is like JoJo from down the street, who went to some training and figured out how to do this. These are your neighbors. And the head of Johnson C. Smith University is like, marched with King when he was a little kid, and he was just like, and it was like told Reverend as well. He was like, no, we ain't gonna go there, people. And he basically told them, it's like, no, this isn't gentrification. If anything, it's self-gentrification, because this is development that's happening by us and for us, and besides which we like nice things too. Let's not pretend that we don't. And I don't use that phrase anymore because it's just like it's just too triggering for people. But I think we've gotta like embrace the fact that we've been great creators and innovators of awesome things and have been. And how do we sort of take that and spread it forward as we think about how do we restore our communities as well, again, from the inside out.
Professor Taylor, you're nodding now, so can join in.
I would love to jump back in.
Yeah.
I could listen to the two of you talk about the details of urban revitalization all day. It's tremendously edifying and exciting. But I find myself thinking of the stakes of this work, right? We do this work, we try to alter the material conditions under which people live their lives so that they can live richer and fuller lives. It's not about the material conditions, that's the precondition for other things, right?
Right.
People want to prosper, they want to have meaning, they want to have access to the spaces that matter to them, they want to be able to aspire to things, right? So there's a rich spiritual dimension that's attached to this. And I
Yes.
find myself thinking, Majora, about the challenges, the existential challenges of doing this work, right? Even for someone as successful as you, in the spaces where you've been most successful, I imagine that work is routinely fraught with defeat and setbacks. And I wonder what it has taken for you to assemble the resources to manage those setbacks, right? I think of earlier in your career, you wrote and spoke eloquently about your disappointments around climate justice and greening the economy and so forth. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you manage yourself emotionally, spiritually, in the face of these dire challenges, these towering burdens and obstacles. Right? What does it mean for you as an agent of change to manage yourself through the disappointments and the inevitable setbacks?
I have to constantly, remind myself that I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and that, my father, mother loves me, built me exactly the way I was supposed to be built. And, and as a woman of faith, like that is literally what I go back on, because otherwise it becomes it I will take it personally. And I remember like early on in my career, I absolutely did. And it was just like, what is going on here? And but again, even before like I found faith, it was more about like, wait a second, if I go down, and the beautiful thing about doing this work, and I think especially for so many folks, like they're just happy somebody's doing it. And literally, like I've heard people say it's like, I am so glad you're doing this, because, and basically the honest ones will just be because I know I can't.
Mm.
And so that is a driver. It absolutely is. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like when you know that the fruits of your labor, which I do love. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's not like I don't love what I do. It inspires me and emboldens me, and it makes me like so happy that I get to build stuff that people enjoy, actually mostly more than I do. But that's okay, that's not the point. The point is just like, I know why I was placed on this earth. And so, but so much of it really is, knowing whose child I am, and also um knowing that I need to take the time that I need. Like I spend time in prayer, meditation, I work out like a lot. And that really does just make it so that, okay, this is how I fortify me so that I can go out and do the other crazy stuff. And sometimes, when I feel like nobody cares, and not even nobody cares, people actively go out of their way to remind me that I am not appreciated. Um, and it's just like, okay, because then the good stuff happens and then I forget like all the other stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dominique, would you like to
Yes.
ask another question before we turn it over to questions from our audience?
I have like 42 questions, Leah, but I'll definitely keep it to
Okay,
one. So when there was a question that sparked this about healthcare, about health and development, and I often say that all roads lead back to real estate, right? So everything really is at the core of real estate. How do you, in the work that you do, how do you make that spider web, that ecosystem in your projects?
You mean the web of like the between the
Community.
built and the natural environment, and how real estate development kind of informs them all? Or I just
Right.
want to make sure I'm
Or
understanding the question.
that web between, let's say that if real estate is the core of a community and everything that comes out from it, from education to healthcare, all of that, how do you touch all those systems inside of the projects that you do? Do you have a partner from healthcare? Do you have a partner in education? Do you have a partner in other community events?
That's an awesome question, because not informally, yes, and it almost happens, and this is what's so real, what's kind of cool is that it develops like in these really weird organic ways. Like, for example, last year, actually before the pandemic, our coffee shop, it's like this nexus for artists, to we've got a big wall, so they do art showings and stuff like that. And so we actually got a little pot of money from an arts organization, from the Bronx Council on the Arts, to support artists, like emerging artists, to use our space, to host their work. And then the pandemic hit. And then, so it was like, we can't have people inside. We just can't. So what are we going to do? So what did we do? We put the artwork outside. And so we would host these like mini art and performing arts events like every single week. And we had a linoleum dance floor that we'd put out. And it would be a dance party, and people would look at art, and it would just be like this open air, wonderful way for people to connect. And I swear, like, even there were a couple times when we probably went later than we should have, but even the people in the building above would come down and be like, okay, you went a little late last night. However, it was so nice to hear like sounds of laughter and joy on the street, that we were like, nobody call the cops. It was amazing. And so now we're building these partners because we saw like the kind of mental health and physical health issues that were being addressed, and and actually crime on our corner didn't happen, like as long as we've been on that coffee shop. And we were just like, wait a second, like, this is actually a public health benefit here. So we're actually now building those relationships with the public health sector, in the public and private sector, because like they're just like, what are you doing? Like, somebody saw pictures of something that we were posting on Instagram, and they were just like, this is the kind of stuff that we want to see more people do. And then it gives us an opportunity to talk to them about mental well-being and physical blah blah blah, and we could do testing. And I'm just like, good, this is what real estate can be used for. We weren't trying to go out of our way to make that happen. We weren't at all. But now, we're hoping that some of them will be supportive of this future work, which also supports artists, which supports us as a small business, because more people come to the cafe to hang out and, see the art and listen to the performances, and, just feel better about just like their lives, because something cool is actually happening in their own community. And so those, and even with the local, and I can't tell you how many young people I've mentored just by act of literally being out there. And once they realize that, for some reason, it's the funniest thing, but it pains me. But at the same time, it just shows us like how much further we need to go. They'll appreciate me, my work, and then they'll ask me, so where do you live?
Mm.
And I was like, well, if you cross the street and could walk straight through that building, you'd be in my backyard. And they're like, wait, you live in this neighborhood, but you're like successful. And that's all relative, obviously. But, but in their eyes, I am. But to them, successful people don't stay in neighborhoods like this.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that normal? We've normalized that, as opposed to recognizing like, we're daughters and sons of this community, and like our first fruits. Why is it that our best fruit doesn't like give forth and support the development of more in our own community? Like, I want to plant flowers here, and I want other folks to do that too. I want them to come home. Like, I think of homecomings, so that we can inspire folks to think about, how do we create value in our own community by supporting the value that's already here, so that in turn, actually, that reinvestment comes back to support us. And yeah, it's an exciting kind of place to be in. And I know it's really hard for a lot of folks to kind of take in, especially since white supremacy doesn't just impact, doesn't just come from, not only white people are affected by white supremacy, but we've taken in this idea that we are actually less than on some level, and we act that out. I think especially in the space that has to do with the monetary value within our own community. That white supremacy is a very powerful tool. Yeah.
This makes my spirit smile. I just want to let you know that, everyone all together.
That's so beautiful.
The chat is starting to explode with questions. So I have one that sort of relates to your last point here. It seems that much of the complexity around urban affordability and access to wealth building opportunities is zoning, combating sprawl, redevelopment, and gentrification. How can we reimagine traditional zoning policies to maximize live, work, play, allow families and business owners to graduate up within a neighborhood over generations and build real wealth rather than the limitations of typical affordable housing policies?
Okay, yes. I mean, zoning is like such a monster and it's super annoying and it's probably way more complicated than it needs to be. And it's often used as a crutch, against increasing density that allows more things. Because right now we've got, a law of supply and demand, and gentrification is a byproduct of reurbanization that exists within the context of zoning policies that don't allow more growth. So basically you've got speculators who know how to game the real estate system, who are often buying properties for way less than they're worth, in these reurbanized inner core communities that are being gentrified, right? And then they're coming in, to making sure that people don't understand the value of their own homes. They buy property. Who are they building for? They're not building for the folks that are here. And so then, but no new building is often happening as well. So that is one of the problems, that where zoning is just like how is this not even considered real? But it's not. But the other thing that I think is super important is that even within the context of policy, the fact that owner occupied, low income homeowners, in communities, they are often a tremendous source of affordable housing, because they will often like rent to their families, or to people that they know. And the price that they rent at is generally more affordable than other places that would expect you'd get, right? So they're not being supported to stay. There's almost never any opportunities I've found. And if someone knows them, please let me know. I'm trying to see if there's the same kind of, as if you commit a crime, you'll get a court appointed attorney. If you want to sell a property, you can do it in a week. No, it doesn't. When that deed goes from one place to another, nobody checks to see if the family that sold it knew exactly what they were getting into. Like we saw in 2008, the kind of crazy, stupid mortgages, and people should have gone to jail for what they did to folks and took advantage of people who literally, most of them were not aware of what they were getting into. And it should have been criminal, but it wasn't. And I still think it's criminal, the fact that sometimes 6-figure deals just go across a table from a family that was able to buy a home, in a low status community back when nobody wanted it. And then reurbanization happens and a speculator can buy it, no questions asked, because people don't realize that, they don't know how to watch real estate trends, because again, we don't have the uncles in the business who are passing that knowledge down. I want an uncle in the business. Some folks could make that happen. So why are we not? Why is philanthropy not building funds so that they're buying those homes and holding on to them so that people in the family could buy them? There's all sorts of things that could happen at a very local level if folks wanted to do it. And policies could be created around that as well, to ensure at least an opportunity for folks to be able to move into the realm of wealth creation possibilities, or even just retention. Just hold on, have the people who do own property hold on to it. Let's make sure that happens.
Yeah, zoning. Oof. Here's an interesting question that connects to what you said earlier, which I loved about community, not just being a place, but also being an activity. The audience member writes, my name is Bharati. I'm the founder of an Indian environmental and social justice nonprofit, Chintan. Thank you for your words. My question is about key elements. Do we build cities or as we build cities or neighborhoods, which are also communities of empathy and inclusion? I'm coming from the space of our ongoing tragic pandemic where thousands are dying every day. We don't have oxygen. We are seeing lots of people of all kinds putting out resources. But even as neighbors are looking for oxygen for neighbors and feeding the elderly, we see that the way that newer cities are planned, people live in a way that breaks these linkages. Have you seen this, and how do you address this?
I mean, well, first of all, my heart just goes out to India in general, and I'm just pray for this, for safety, and it does not surprise me that folks are out there trying as hard as they can, but what you described in the first part of this of your comment really is people trying to take care of each other, right? Like they know that they've got a neighbor who needs some help, and at jeopardy to themselves, like they're going to try to get them some help, right? And you're absolutely right. I think the way that so many places are being built right now, and even the way some, in particular, low status communities operate, the idea, those bonds where community is an activity, and a unbelievably horrid example, but it's very illustrative. There was a huge heat wave in Chicago a number of years ago, and there was this one horrible story. Both very poor neighborhoods, demographically pretty much the same, racial, economic. They were just poor, very poor communities. But one community had little places where people actually saw each other. So there was like a public market, nothing crazy, but just like people would get together and like a flea market and sell stuff. In another neighborhood, there was nothing like that. And that neighborhood had one of the highest death rates because people didn't even know who their neighbors were. So they died, especially the elderly, alone in their homes because nobody even knew to look for them. Whereas in the other place, people knew. It's like, oh, we need to go check out, Mr. Roberts over here or whatever, because we haven't seen him around. So let's just make sure he's good. And that's how they would get people out of their like hot apartments, and into cooling centers, and they lived a lot more. And so your point is incredibly well taken, because how we design communities so that you can build those type of community linkages, if you're not building them, they won't happen. I mean, that's why we built a cafe. I mean, I like coffee and stuff, but I didn't want to do that. But it was just like, we are not going to be able to really prove out a model that if we can retain the talent by building spaces for people to want, so they can see each other, so they can see, hope and aspiration as it walks through the door. They can see like these are people that are just like me, who have, who are creative, who are innovators, and like I didn't know they were there before. So wait, you live in my neighborhood, like this is something that we need to do together. And again, if you don't see it, you won't believe it. So you have to be building those out. Have to. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question about, and this is sort of, I mean, it's not Nashville specific, but I think it is an issue in Nashville. How do we get healthcare partners to buy into the idea of revitalizing local communities and low status communities? Is that something that you've experienced or worked with?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like, I mean, public health, you're always going to need it, right? But I think like some of the more innovative folks that are working in public health are looking for like different problems to solve. Like, as opposed to like, is it always going to be diabetes and obesity in our communities? Like, how are we going to, work so that it becomes more of a preventative, big issue so that we can control it that way? People still going to need care, but it's not like chronically destroying people's lives. And I think, the sort of the coupling, whether it's, of real estate, and healthcare, with the kind of healthcare practitioners and professionals who see the value of having a much more, uh, healthy population, because it helps them as well. The same way that, we're also really interested in how utilities, public utility or public or private, utilities are, if they're where some of them, many of them, whether it's cold or they're fossil fuel based, get a lot of that. Why are they not looking at, the fact that so many cars are going to need batteries, that could come from different kind of sources. So and electricity, period. So how about we, like, again, just reframe the conversation so that folks can start thinking of different ways to make their money and to still be in practice, but it's just different. That's really, I think, a big part of how we can, sort of change the dynamic. It's like, we're not saying we're going to not have anything to do with people being healthy. Of course, we want to just figure out ways to sort of manage it in a way so that people are still getting the care they need. But yeah, I think it's a really important thing to make, like even designing, housing so that there's less sick people, like less, sick building syndrome, which also leads to sicker people, things like that.
Dominique has posted a point in the chat that I think is a really useful, question, comment, something to think about here. Dominique, you are writing about a traditional sense of community. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's simple that from the New Deal, which I also like to call the Raw Deal, was a change from traditional neighborhoods. Neighborhoods and suburbs are vastly different. And then when you enter into things like HOAs and all of these rules and regulations, and for example, in Memphis, as we work on the community land trust, and one of the things they rolled out was this, set of kind of rules. My family, my husband's family, is from Orange Mound, and Orange Mound is one of the oldest traditionally Black homeowner opportunities. It's a historic district, right? And so now when you want to put a community land trust in Orange Mound and you want to put all these rules, if my mother-in-law wants to paint her porch, she can't do that now because that's not part of the HOA. So suburbs and things like that. And that's how I had to shift that conversation. So things like suburbs, when you bring these rules and all of these things, you've taken the sense of we belong to we can only belong if. And so that's where the difference between neighborhoods and suburbs steps off the soapbox sometimes.
No, it's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. We have, as a final question that I'd love to bring in, one of our audience members writes, as a person teaching, researching literature and film, what is your opinion about the role of not only public art, but also fiction, film, documentary in creating value in a community? Do they play a role in working towards imagining a more just community?
Well, fingers crossed and praying that the teleplay that the show that I co-wrote is going before a pretty big production company, and it's all about real estate development, and it's got like drugs and sex and craziness in it as well, because we want people to learn about boring things like zoning, except like in a really interesting way. And it's about that. It's about families, and one who's actually the daughter of a really wealthy real estate development titan, and a young Black female developer, very loosely based on me, who actually has very different ideas for developing the same rapidly gentrifying community. So fingers crossed. Like, obviously, I think that this is a great way, to share that kind of information, it's out there. I think there's a role for documentaries. I think there's definitely, there's, Pablo Picasso had a really amazing way of using art, as a way to show what was going on, where they were and why it could be and how it could be expressed in a different way so that folks so it was accessible. So I think, arts and artists in particular are just critical to this. I mean, number one, they just make a community super vibrant. And when they're out sharing that, with each other, it's just, yeah, you need it. Our Paul, our Marvin Gaye lookalike over here, it was, it's true. You do. Now that I'm looking at you, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. It's really crazy, but how, like that, like he was a voice of a generation. And I feel like we sometimes forget that. And so we could have fun while we're doing it as well. And we should.
I think that we are out at time here. Is that true? I believe we are.
Yes, I think we are.
Yeah, this has been such a fascinating conversation, and I wish it could go on for hours because I now understand why all roads lead to real estate, which I did not before. And it's wonderful to hear about the work that you're doing. And thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the Robert Penn Warren Center for sponsoring this discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was really fun. You guys are awesome. You make me want to come back to Nashville real soon. And hopefully
on
we will
back.
be.
I'm back.
We
Come
will be.
back.
Come on back. We have a place
Yeah.
for you.
Mhm.
Yep.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yes.
So fingers crossed, we'll be back with the Civic Design Center soon.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it would be. Yay.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
everyone.
right. Take care, guys. Bye.